we did a little clapping exercise, but I want to get oriented. Could you do me a favor and raise your hand if you actually work in operations or you manage an operations team? Wow, huge. So this speech I'm about to give is about data and driving growth with data. And operations is really the powerhouse of a media company. You make sure campaigns deliver. You make sure campaigns perform. You talk to the client multiple times per day. And you have your hands on the data. You have your hands on the creatives, the order IDs, the impressions, the delivery, the performance records. And between talking to the client and having your hands on the data, you are in the greatest position in a media organization to drive growth with data, which is what we're going to talk about today. And we're not going to talk about it from a technology point of view or a stats point of view, because data and AI are not about technology. They're about ideas. And based on that position, that special position you have in your organization, you have those ideas. And real quick, and I am going to call some of y'all out, just mentally think about what's a challenge you wish you could fix in your team or in your company. And to make it simple, think about it in terms of like, this would be a great year for me or for us if we could just blank. And we are going to come back to this. You looked super thoughtful for a minute. So thoughtful that you're not paying attention to me. What was the challenge that you're, she's like, oh, wow. Can you think of the challenge you would want to fix this year? How can you increase your pricing because you feel like there's more value there and you're not getting it? Okay, great. Can I get another one? Somebody else? Go ahead, just raise your hand. Oh, you, okay, good. Hand raised, thank you. Find scale. Scale in what? Like reach more audience. Reach more audience per ad campaign, probably. Nice one. I'm kind of going for the people who are adjusting their hair, which was sort of you, actually. Do you mind going? What's it?
How can we find impressions off-site that we can monetize?
Brilliant. How can they find impressions off-site that they can monetize, making more money with somebody else's inventory? So these are all challenges that we could use to use data for to drive growth in your organization. And I actually want you all to remember what you mentally took note of, because we're going to come back to it in a minute. But also just remember that data and growth does not always necessarily equal sales or top line. It can be about cost efficiencies. It can be about developing your talent. And I've got nonprofit clients, and for them it's really all about the mission. How are they fulfilling the mission? And that's important too. But as we use data in organizations, I found in a 20-year career that there are some pretty serious obstacles to putting data to work. First is we're intimidated by data. It's arcane, it's got a lot of language. Definitely AI it's true for that as well. We get lost in the data and lost in the AI jargon. We don't see what we have. The whole notion of latent data is that we have data in our organizations that are assets that we're just simply not putting to work. And also psychologically, we don't feel that we can change blank. We don't feel that we can change our boss's mind or change the company or change the industry. And we're going to work our way through these obstacles today. And I think it's especially bad because of AI. Does anyone read the Paul Roetzer newsletter or listen to his podcast? It's really fantastic. He is an educator about AI. He has a weekly podcast. And he just posted this weekend in his newsletter that even he is struggling to keep up with AI. There, I said it. I love that he wrote that. And we're all feeling that way. And publishing is, I don't need to tell you this, because AI search is stopping the traffic before it even gets there, because the AI engines are scraping the content for free. And also, this is affecting everywhere. AI is being made equivalent with efficiency, which means lower headcount, which means we're going into work from a place of fear, and that is exactly the wrong place to come at a world where you want to be taking a risk and driving growth. So I've really brought us down. And actually, that's the end of the speech. It's just actually, no, I want to take you to a place today where you're getting away from all that. You're thinking less about doing more with less and thinking less about fear, and you're coming to that place of passion. What happens when you have your hands on the data and you're talking to the client? And why the hell do you have your job in the first place? What drew you to it? And that's really what we can get to today. We think about this framework that I developed over 20 years. First is to cut out the noise. Stop being intimidated by the jargon and by all you have to learn, like Paul Rotzer having this moment of mini despair that there's too much to learn, and there's too much intimidation associated with it. Second, you really need to focus on your big question. When it comes to data and AI, it's very easy to get distracted. It's very easy to be squirrel mentality and jump from one topic to the next. There's a big business question that you can find that takes work to really crystallize for yourself, but once you get there, it's extremely powerful. Third, you need to make friends with the latent data, the assets around your organization that you're not paying attention to. These are going to be your building blocks to drive growth. And finally, the fun part. It's about being creative. And yes, there is a way to be creative that's not just about inspiration that comes to a lonely poet sitting in a room. It's something we can actually structure and manufacture for ourselves. So let's talk about cutting out the noise. Intimidation is the enemy of innovation. I found that out in my first job in data. I worked at Nielsen. And I didn't know, I was in my 20s, and I came into the organization, and I was walking to the middle of this political brawl. The CEO at Nielsen wanted to make sure that we were producing data like a factory. So when we produced data at Nielsen, what that was in this context was we were getting data from the grocery stores in every single country, in every single region, and then we're pushing it back out to the manufacturers like Procter & Gamble and Unilever as market share data. And the problem was we were doing this differently in every single country all over the world. The CEO wanted to make a single factory, a single way to produce the data. But the executives were resistant. Guess why? They ran the countries. They ran the regions. They didn't want to change what they were doing to accommodate some broader template. So the CEO got frustrated. He brought in McKinsey. And I came in as like the strategy kid. And these meetings took place in a boardroom where McKinsey was on one side and the Nielsen executives sat on the other. And the McKinsey executives were all 30 years old. They had all run 5 miles that morning. They were thin and wore ties. The Nielsen executives were all 50 plus. They had 30 pounds of dad weight. They wore pleated khakis. Some of them had mustaches. And I was sitting on the back bench because I knew nothing. And it really felt like I was seeing the English National Cricket Club face off with the Chicago Bears. And they didn't only clash in their styles, there was kind of a language component to it. The McKinsey guys, first thing they did was they broke things into 3 parts. The second thing they did was to remind you every time they spoke that they're smarter than you, right? And the third thing they did was they punctuated all their sentences with right, so you would think that they were right? And on the Nielsen side, they used jargon aggressively. It was point of sale data and share of volume analysis and trade promotions. And I'm sitting on the back bench, and I don't know what any of these things mean because I came into this because I was an English major. And I studied Joyce and Keats. I didn't know what any of these terms meant, but what I realized after a certain time at Nielsen is that once you cut through that aggressive jargon, which was used for power, it was used for them to keep the other side at bay. And once you stopped thinking about knowledge as power over and started to get into thinking about knowledge as power to do something, that was when you really found something special. And also I found that sort of beginner's mind as an English major allowed me to see things that other people weren't seeing, just because I wasn't as technical. And there's stuff happening in the online business at that time. Nielsen was thinking about everything in terms of demographics, and some of you might remember back this far in the industry that this is true. Nielsen was trying to measure websites like they were TV shows, age and sex. And everything was site level, it was publisher level, and Nielsen was playing the role of a researcher in the business. But what was happening was the beginning of the programmatic revolution. And what advertisers wanted was to predict purchase. And what they wanted was to measure things at the campaign level, not at the site level. And the clients were not so much publishers, but now they were DSPs. And advertisers didn't care at all about research. What they cared about was ROI. So I give myself credit. I was really the first person at Nielsen to get us into a suite of products that suited these needs by launching targeting products that got at purchase prediction and measurement that got at campaigns. And it started small, like a 7-figure business, but it grew to an 8-figure business, then a 9-figure business, and now I would argue it's pretty much all of Nielsen's digital business. So that was that first lesson I learned in my part of my career about just not being intimidated. All right, so now we've got to the first phase where we think we have a right to be talking about data. Now we need to do the work to crystallize what our big question is. We can't let data overload distract us from what really matters. I'm going to tell one more story about myself, then go broader. Another story is when I started at Samsung Ads, when I really learned about focusing on your big question. Samsung Ads was really scrappy at that time. So Samsung is obviously a colossal manufacturing company. They started an ads business to stitch all the smart TVs together and put ads on them. We were really scrappy. We were in the front half of a floor that was mainly dedicated to the robotics department. And I would kind of kick a pair of robot legs every time I went to the coffee machine because they were just drifting around the floor. My whole analytics team fit around a card table. And about 6 months into my job there, the pandemic happened. And people stopped watching traditional TV so much, linear TV, and they started going to streaming because they had the deep libraries, and you could do that when you're locked in the house. And literally 1 billion people overnight started streaming television. And what happened was all the ad agencies started calling Samsung Ads because we had automatic content recognition technology, ACR, which allowed us to tell the difference between what was happening on the television that was watching streaming television and traditional television. And all the ad agencies wanted to know, what's happening with my audience? I have Procter & Gamble breathing down my neck that millennial moms are no longer watching traditional television and Procter has to sell Tide. And so the big question, I thought, was how much more streaming TV our audience is watching. And my data science group, which is run by this New Zealand guy, started doing these ad hoc queries, and we could say to Procter & Gamble about millennial moms, yeah, a year ago they were watching 20% streaming, now they're watching 40%. And then General Motors called, and they wanted to know about the Cadillac driver. And they were watching 30% streaming a year ago, and now they're watching 50%. And then Unilever would call. And then BMW would call, and all these other advertisers would call, and I was slamming my team. We got to build these ad hoc queries faster and faster, and we were cranking them out for weeks and weeks and weeks. And my Kiwi data science guy said, Justin, no one's buying anything. This is not working. I don't even know if that's a New Zealand accent. They're just taking our data, and they're using it, and they're not paying us anything. He really does sound like that. And I realized that I had fallen into a problem. I was becoming data-ish. I was getting overloaded with data and only thinking about the problem in terms of more data and different ways to use data and how to make data faster. See also methodology madness. And what I was really missing is that it was about fear. Procter & Gamble was afraid of the streaming TV ecosystem because they didn't know what streaming ads was like. They didn't know what putting an on-demand ad was like. It could be somebody at 3 a.m. he was like in the pandemic sort of binging pies every day with crumbs going down their shirt. And that was totally not me. I was not that person who bought a pie every day in the pandemic. And what they really wanted was millennial moms. So our real question was, what will make P&G comfortable with streaming? How do we get them over that fear? And we created a completely different report that told exactly what a millennial mom was watching in the streaming environment. And short of having Procter & Gamble over the shoulder of the millennial moms watching television with them, we told them everything they could possibly want to know about what the streaming TV ad experiences was like. The advertisers became comfortable. Each one of those advertisers, probably 100 a month, were ordering this report from us. Every single one of them started spending more, and it opened the floodgates for hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue to pour into Samsung ads. And the lesson I took away is that data can answer any question, but it really takes work to understand what that question is, and it takes mental work to stay focused on that. As a business leader, don't become the worst junior data scientist on your team. Stay focused as a business leader on the business questions. All right, so hopefully now we know how not to get lost in the data and how to focus on our big question. Let's talk about latent data. So I want to start with a question for the audience, a little hand-raising exercise. For all of you, are you using pretty much all the data you have? Okay, great. There's a lot of data humility in the group. That's good. I believe every organization has data that they're not using that has value. And I'm going to create a framework here. I've created a framework, and I want to kind of jog loose some ideas for you. So let's put on your peripheral vision. Think about your organization here as I go through the 6 T's of latent data. First is traits. What are the characteristics of your customers? Do you have the demographic information from their registration? I'm going to use some non-publishing examples here. If you're in the healthcare industry, you might know what a condition somebody has. You know what their tastes are because you see their preferences. Maybe they searched for a certain thing on Pinterest, or they're a frequent visitor to a location that might be their home, their business, or their favorite Starbucks shop. In terms of traffic, when you have your site or you have any kind of business with a domain, you're seeing volume and change in that domain. You might, if you're a streaming television company, see people viewing during prime time. Or if you're the National Oceanographic Administration, you might see sea change levels in a particular location. By the way, everyone hates that example, but I'm sticking with it because I think it's cool. Transactions are maybe the simplest, like what are people buying from you? And what pricing are you seeing? Someone mentioned pricing here before. So you're seeing that people bought the pay-per-view for $75, but if you're in the US Department of Agriculture, you're also noticing commodity prices. Tokens, I use in the old sense of IDs, that there are users or objects of value that you can assign identifiers to. It's very powerful to have an account ID that you can associate all an account's activity into. But you can also assign IDs to objects like stores. There was a business at Nielsen called TD Links that created a unique identifier for every store in the United States. Maybe you have a unique ID for for all the articles you store in your publication. And then treasuries are my word for stores of information that have a lot of value. You might not be thinking about it, but do you have 30 years worth of men's fashion articles? Does that feel like a treasury you can do something with? If you're a healthcare company and you have 1 million MRI images, is that something you can train an AI to read and interpret MRI results? So if you take all these T's, your organization might not have all of them, but you're going to at least have 1 or 2. And you can also think about them in combination. What happens when you combine your treasuries with your tokens, or your traits with your traffic? And then we come back to the notion of, are we all using the data we have? It's very easy to get blinded to what you have. When I was at Samsung, the business was so focused on television that 9 times out of 10, I was thinking about using the television data in my day-to-day work, and I was ignoring the fact that Samsung had a massive amount of mobile app data that we could use for various purposes. It's easy to get blinded. So sometimes we don't see what we have. So now let's have a little fun. You've cut out the noise. You've given yourself permission to play. You've focused on your big question. You know what you want to accomplish with great effort. You've made friends with the latent data. You know the stuff you have to work with. These are the components that are going to help you achieve your mission. And now we're going to get creative. I think that being creative is not so much about inspiration. It's about taking a simple lateral step. It's not about breaking what you do. You don't have to change the business model of the organization. You just have to give it a little twist. And how can we put a formula on that so you can really take it home and use it? Well, let's start, of course, with the Disney film. The movie Frozen was a huge hit in 2013, and the screenwriter, Jennifer Lee, went on to become the chief creative officer of Disney. Why? Because Disney had a fantastic business in basically doing romance movies between a male and a female protagonist, Princess and the Frog, Beauty and the Beast. I'm not sure why the man always has to be an animal in these setups, but that's a representative of the obstacles that the two have to bridge. And what Jennifer Lee did was she realized that she could do a Disney movie, but it's going to be about sisters. It's going to be about not Beauty and the Beast, but about Anna and Elsa, because Elsa has powers, and the powers are too powerful. Elsa needs to learn how to manage them, and that's the obstacle that's going to bridge the two sisters' relationship. And with that simple twist, she revived the franchise, so much so that the New York Times journalist Charles Duhigg made it a case study, and he distilled it into the notion that we just take something we know as individuals, you, and institutions, your organization, and you just do something slightly different with it. And this is not a new idea. This goes back to the 1600s. Did anyone read John Donne in college? Really? Okay. I love John Donne. He was responsible for the phrases, "Death be not proud, no man is an island, for whom the bell tolls." But his most famous poem is about a flea. And what's weird about it is that this pest becomes the subject of a love poem. And the love poem is about the lover and his love object, and they can't be together for whatever reason. And so he imagines the flea biting them both, and the blood in the flea's stomach being the metaphor for how they can commingle, which is really gross. And it goes, "The flea swells with one blood made of two, and this, alas, is more than we would do. This flea is you and I, and this our marriage bed and marriage temple is." It's a very strange poem, but we're still reading it 400 years later. But 150 years after he wrote it, the famous critic Samuel Johnson commented on John Donne's poetry. And he said, in John Donne's poetry, the most heterogeneous ideas are yoked together by violence. A phrase that I love. It's about that lateral step. It's about the thing that Jennifer Lee did in the Disney movie to take a romance structure and make it about sisters. And we can do this in your organizations and with your data. So if you're a publisher and you have search on your website, could you raise your hand, please? It's a pretty big percentage. All right. We're going to raise your hands again. Do you think search is an exciting way to create new products for your organization? All right, a couple. Okay, good. Well, if you go to Pinterest, you can look up appetizers, you can look up wedding dresses, and you can do a search for striped ceiling. Does anyone know where I'm going? Okay, good. You can do a search for striped ceiling. And that doesn't seem that exciting, but when you think about the volume of data that Pinterest has, it actually starts to get pretty exciting. And in fact, it is the source of Pinterest Predicts. Pinterest Predicts, they used to call the not yet happening trends report, not yet trending report, because it talks about trends in consumers who are looking into style, they're looking into decoration, and Pinterest is making this accessible to the marketers that they're doing business with. If you're a marketer at Target, you want to know what Pinterest is seeing every day in terms of the search that's happening on their websites and the trends that are emerging from that data, because it really is just search data. Now they're expending considerable effort. They're taking like terms like stripe ceiling, circus nursery, circus interior. They're measuring how much these are going up in order to understand that it's a growing trend that they care about. And then they're taking those like terms into this totally insane but totally brilliant home trend of funhouse. Think bold stripes and just a wink of clownish charm. And not only are they showing this as a trend that they're using to engage their advertisers, but this is actually a revenue opportunity. They're packaging funhouse as an audience that they can then turn around and sell to their clients. And to me, this suggests a data innovation framework, where on the one hand, we see what the client needs, and on the other hand, we see what our latent data is. And somehow, we need to come up with a delivery mechanism to connect our client's dilemma with our data. So for Pinterest Predicts, the dilemma was they have the VP of marketing at Target who really needs to understand and also to reach consumers. And on the other hand, they have search data, and they came up with a way to bridge that gap with a trends report. So I want to come back to the question at the top of the session about the challenge. Let's conjure that back up in your mind, whatever you thought of in that moment. There was pricing, there was, I should have done a better job of remembering. That would have been my magic trick. There were other challenges in the room. Think about when you go back to the office, think about two types of latent data that you have and one type of client challenge, customer challenge, and what is the delivery mechanism that you could use to bridge the gap between them? And how can you turn that into a driver of growth like Pinterest Predicts in your organization? And there's one final obstacle that we have to get over when we do this. It's to get over the mental obstacle that our data is not complete enough and our data is not accurate enough. No data set, even at Samsung we had TV data from 72 million TVs. No data set is going to be absolutely complete. Even 72 million TVs was not all the TVs in the TV universe. And I had this experience at Nielsen, and I was very anxious about launching a new product. And this veteran data scientist came up to me, and I was saying, Dave Miller, is it going to work? And he gets this big smile on his face, as if this is something he'd been thinking about for decades. And he said, Justin, it doesn't need to be perfect. The data just needs to be better than your next best alternative. Is it better than what the client had yesterday? Does the VP of data, does the VP of marketing at Target care whether Pinterest absolutely knows that there are 5 million people interested in clown fashion? No, they don't. What they care about is that this gives them more information than they had yesterday, and that Pinterest is being transparent about their methodology, that the funhouse trend is sourced from these 3 search terms, and this is the percentage that's going up, and that makes the exercise intellectually honest, even though the data is incomplete. So I hope this section about creativity has given us permission to feel like we can do something different and we can drive change. It's not about destroying what we had. It's about just taking a lateral step. So I want to finish where I started. A word about you. If you're in operations, you are talking to the client all the time. You have your hands on the data, and no one is in a better position to use the hidden power of latent data than you, as long as you follow the framework to cut out the noise, give yourself permission, focus on your big question, do that work, make friends with the latent data because these are your building blocks, and just take that lateral step into the creative thinking and use the framework in order to drive growth with data. So that's my session. This is my contact information. I'd love to hear from you. Yes, please follow the Substack. Thanks very much.
Hold on 1 second there.
Yeah.
So, first of all, thank you so much. I was gonna, if I could have the clicker.
Oh, I thought you wanted my water.
Yeah, no, I'm good with that. I got a little nervous when you said circus fashion. I was going to say to go like that, but there.
That wasn't directed at you.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you. One thing I was just going to add, and love your thoughts on this. I've been producing reports for senior, staff for a long, long time, and somewhere along the lines, I came up with kind of in my mind the term of like reports as like a security blanket, right? It's like I have this report or I have this dashboard, and it like basically. I now understand my business because, I've got the report, I got the data. And I know I've always sat there and in fact, I actually spent my weekend trying to it's funny, I didn't know necessarily where you're gonna go, but I was taking data from pre-bid and I was taking data from my GAM and I was sitting there trying to figure out new ways to kind of look at this stuff. But this idea of like reports is something that like a lot of us in our jobs continually get asked to do is just the report or the dashboard or whatever. What are your thoughts on that in terms of like the deliverable versus, again, trying to create your own stuff?
I mean, in terms of focus of effort on creating the report versus trying to do something new. Well, first of all, I'm sure you're all thinking about it, that using an AI tool can really help produce those reports faster, and it can even give you an opportunity to drive insights from the report. Sorry, you look just like the Kiwi guy from my story, and I was afraid you were here, but it's somebody different. Are people, it would just be embarrassing.
Yeah.
Although I did it to his face.
Yeah.
He yelled at me. Are folks using AI to kind of do those reports in more summary fashion? And those of you who didn't raise your hand, are you not doing it because your organization has like firewalls and they're not letting you use certain AI tools? You can just sort of shout it out, yes or no. Yes, that's one of the reasons. What's another reason why you wouldn't do that? Just because you haven't got to it? AIs can lie. Okay, fair. Yeah, I'm starting to do some structure in the reports that I do where I'm creating an AI researcher, an AI writer, and then an AI fact checker. So that would be one way, is just do that faster.
Yeah.
But then I think that's a great opportunity for the big question.
Yeah.
Who are your stakeholders? Like, when was as an ops person, when was the last time you really talked to the person who was consuming that information, and what do they really want? What would be a delightful surprise? What would frickin' terrify them to see in this report? And by the way, why do they want the report? Who are they reporting to, and what does that person want to hear?
Yep. Yeah.
And once you think more contextually around the report, it can give you an idea like, if what we're really trying to do is make sure that our CPM is creeping up over time, or our competitive benchmarks are stronger, or we're getting more of a certain type of value, let's start thinking about that metric and how we can innovate on top of the baseline report that you already
really
have.
go for those insights. Yeah, I like to take the approach of like trying to answer the question my boss doesn't have time to ask me for. Right, that was always my kind of thing. Well, I really appreciate it. I know you're going to be sticking around, so Justin's going to have one of the breakouts and kind of diving into talking with anyone that wants to kind of go through like problem solving, working through how to use data, right? Some of these ideas and drilling down. Does that sound good?
Sounds awesome.
All right, Justin, thank you
See
so
you in a
much.
bit. Thank you.
All right, awesome.
Thanks,
Thank you. All right.